Hello, and welcome to Midnight Dust, the Are You Afraid of the Dark podcast that reviews each episode in depth, exploring themes, rating episodes, highlighting Midnight Society members, trivia, and more. I am your host, Professor Terror, otherwise known as Mark. So pull up a log and sprinkle some dust on the fire, and let's get into it. Act 1, The Tale of the Phantom Cab. We recap the story as well as analyze it for morals, themes, and more. Act 2, Member Highlight. Today's tale is from prospective new member Frank. We take a look into his character as well as some stories that he tells throughout his tenure. Act 3, Trivia. A brief look at the development of the show. Stick around. Today's episode is brought to you by Pine Tree Audio. Working on an audio project that's not going quite right? Audio cables letting you down? Pine Tree Audio designs and handcrafts audio solutions at the highest level of quality, providing customers with passive preamps, speaker selectors, power supplies and filters, speakers, power cables, auxiliary cables, and more. Visit Pine Tree Audio on the web today. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Dust Podcast Society, I bring you Episode 1 of Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Phantom Cab. Our episode begins with Gary explaining the premise of the show. This group of kids from different backgrounds, interests, friend groups, and schools are all bound together by their love of the macabre and storytelling. They get together late at night in the woods around the campfire to share scary stories that they themselves write. They call themselves the Midnight Society. David is leading Frank to the meeting place, and already we can tell Frank is a tough guy. He is blindfolded as the meeting place is secret, and he is not yet a member. David is sponsoring him, and by the rules of the Midnight Society, the potential new member has to tell a story to the rest of the group, and afterwards they vote on whether or not to let the new member in. Frank begins his story, The Tale of the Phantom Cab. Denny and Buzz are brothers hiking in the woods. Denny seems to be around 13, 14-ish, and Buzz around 11 or 12. Denny is a bit of a tough guy. Buzz is a bit of a dork. You know, a nerd. Buzz idolizes his big brother and is trying to prove himself. Buzz is a little confused as they seem to be lost, and Denny gives him crap for it. While trying to figure out why they are lost, Buzz almost walks off a mini cliff after dumping water on the map. Hey, at least they brought a map and a compass. That's something. The mini cliff is not the kind that would kill you necessarily, but more of the break-a-leg variety. Denny warns him and pulls him back as he hangs off the ledge. Denny is annoyed and the boys are lost. The dark sets in and the temperature drops. The brothers argue a little bit. The plan was to head south and then eventually they would be back in town, or at least someplace they recognize, but this plan has not worked. Buzz stares at the compass in disbelief. Denny notices that Buzz holds his compass near his belt buckle and that the metal in his belt buckle is throwing off the reading because his belt is magnetic. I had to look this up. For one thing, it would be erroneous to say that his belt buckle is magnetic. It has metals in it that it could interfere with the compass slightly, but it doesn't seem like it would mess with it enough to send them completely in the wrong direction. Apparently, the first magnetic belt buckle was made in 1962. It would seem that this plot point is fairly sound, or at least good enough. I, however, had usually had belt buckles that were not magnetic at all as a kid. Moving on. The boys are lost. They've been going the wrong way for hours and it's cold. Buzz denies this and begins to run in a direction. Denny follows him, but they aren't any closer to town. That's when they see a flashlight. The boys hope for a forest ranger or a hiker. Buzz says maybe it's a maniac killer in a hockey mask who is going to slash them. To this I say, smart lad. It turns out to be a guy named Flynn. He has a leather jacket on and a flashlight and seems mostly normal and nice. The boys tell him their story, and Flynn gives off major Tom Arnold vibes for some reason. Acts kind of goofy, just looks like Tom Arnold, you know. The boys ask him if he is lost, but he says no, not really. He knows these woods pretty well and assures the boys that they are farther from town than they know. He tells them to follow him and that he will take them to someone who can help. The boys debate on going with him, but ultimately do because they are lost and have little choice in the matter. The boys ask why he can't just tell them how to get back. Probably the first red flag. Flynn says it's too far and in the dark they would get lost more. He's taking the boys to a doctor friend of his and asks if they're any good at riddles. Stranger danger for sure. Flynn brings them to a strange yurt structure. He warns them to really need or want help from the doctor because he charges a steep price. The boys turn to ask more questions, but Flynn is gone. The boys debate going to the yurt door, but they hear strange sounds from all around them in the woods. They are also still lost and freezing. No choices. They bang on the door and out comes Dr. Vink. He immediately asks them if they are good at riddles and laughs creepily. The boys are like, I think we will take our chances with mountain lions instead of some strange hermit man who looks like Jerry Garcia's down on his luck cousin who is definitely on a list somewhere and is not allowed to talk to children. Dr. Vink reassures them that this kind of thing happens all the time and that he has a telephone. He also has a fire going. Inside is a bunch of odd stuff: beakers, colored liquids, specimen jars, bubbling, steam, etc. Vink introduces himself, Dr. Vink, with a v. The boys tell Vink that Flynn told them he could help. Dr. Vink doesn't really listen to this and tells them he studies natural science, which is why he is deep in the woods, flora, fauna, that sort of thing. The boys didn't ask. Dr. Vink continues to be strange and menacing and crazy. Denny tells Buzz that he seems like a total nutbag. Dr. Vink shows them a boar's brain that he holds in his hand and jiggles while he tells them more about what happens to the boar after the brain dies and that it still sends electrical signals. Also, he is not a nutbag. However, he is still holding a boar's brain. Kinda weird. The boys ask for the phone and help. Dr. Vink goes back to the topic of riddles and asks them how far can you walk into the woods. Eventually, after a minute or so, Buzz says halfway. After that, you'd be walking out of the woods. Fair enough. Denny walks over to the phone, and Dr. Vink takes out giant hedge clippers and threatens to 86 the phone. Vink says, you solve the next riddle, you can use the phone. If you don't solve it, then the kids have to leave. Denny likes the idea of leaving, but Buzz is on board, and they ask what the riddle is. Vink then takes a few minutes to be strange and absent-minded while deciding what riddle to hit them with. He then decides. What is it that has no weight, can be seen by the naked eye, and if you put it in a barrel, it will make it lighter? Personally, I don't like the way Vink said naked while gazing at the boys, but still. The boys try to figure it out, but cannot, so Vink tells them to beat it. Vink mentions that they have failed like all the others and gives them directions to a nearby road. He says a taxicab will pick them up as it comes by this time every night. Denny says, come on, just let us use your phone and give us another chance. Vink says he could take a specimen from them, then holds up a jar with a severed hand in it. The boys are understandably freaked out, and they run away. I could say that I haven't done this exact same thing to get people to leave my house, but I'd be lying. The episode cuts back to the kids around the campfire, where the kids argue that you can't put a riddle in a story that can't be solved. Some of the Midnight Society members posit that it can be solved, but nobody has the answer currently. Frank tells them to shut up and let him finish the story. Back to the story, and back in the woods, the brothers find the road. They are freaked out by the hand and remark that a cab probably won't come by. A second later, a cab appears and they get in. They ask to be taken into town and the cab speeds off. The boys mention that their parents will cover the fare when they get home. It is revealed that the cab driver is Flynn, but this time he looks a little different, a little off. He mentions that he gives rides to folks who can't answer Dr. Vink's riddles, and he is disappointed thinking that these boys would. It happened to Flynn 40 years ago, and he's been giving cab rides ever since. The cab speeds up and bounds. Flynn mentions that at one point he had given Vink a ride into the woods. Vink offered him a large tip if he could answer a riddle, but he couldn't, so Dr. Vink took a specimen from him. The boys ask what kind, so Flynn holds up his right arm and shows that he has no hand. Hey, the hand in the jar from earlier was Flynn's. Again, Flynn says he has been running a cab for people that don't solve Vink's riddles. They all end up in the cab with Flynn. They all float down here, too. Flynn had an accident in the cab, a big crash, and as he explains this to the kids, his head turns completely around to face them. As he tells them he died in the crash and laughs crazily. The boys scream and try to get out, but can't. Flynn is cursed to give rides to folks, then crash and kill them. The weird noises outside Dr. Vink's yurt from earlier were the ghosts of the other folks who had failed to answer the riddle and eventually crashed into the cab. The cycle continues until someone solves the riddle. The boys have 30 seconds to solve the riddle before they crash. Buzz says the riddle again, and then Denny says helium, but you can't see helium. Buzz then begins to piece it together and realizes the answer is a hole. Weightless, you can see it, and it will make the barrel lighter. Right as they are about to crash, the cab disappears and the boys are thrown to the ground outside. The cab is nowhere to be found. The curse has been broken. A few seconds later, a park ranger appears and asks them if they are Denny and Buzz. Kind of a stupid question. He says their parents are going nuts and the town is in an uproar. They're just milling around Main Street saying, rabble, 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 rabble. The ranger tells them to get in and he will give them a ride back. We now rejoin the Midnight Society around the campfire, where Frank mentions that after Denny and Buzz got home, they brought the police to Dr. Vink's yurt only to find a crumbling old foundation with vines and branches over it. Nothing else. Frank's story is finished. The Midnight Society members give each other a look, and Gary calls a vote to see if Frank will make full membership. Each kid gives a thumbs up. Membership has to be a unanimous yes vote. Frank is in, and his blindfold is lifted. The other members high-five and congratulate him. The end. Okay, that was our first episode of the first season of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Right off the bat, the show has a pretty strong identity. Some shows take a while to get their footing. The first few episodes of Seinfeld, for example, are funny but a little stiff. Not exactly what you would associate with the most iconic elements of the show. Eventually, however, they clicked and became the iconic sitcom that they are known for being. Ditto Star Trek The Next Generation. Are You Afraid of the Dark, however, is pretty fully formed here, for the most part. Kids around the campfire telling stories. The tone of the story is consistent with the rest of the series. This is a pretty good all-around example of what the show would do for the rest of its run. Relatable characters, a decently spooky story with some surprising, scary moments, and a fun, creative sense of humor. I like this episode a lot, although it's not perfect. First and foremost, despite my teasing earlier, I absolutely love the character of Dr. Vink. He's weird and funny, but there's a real dark menace under the surface that's pretty hard, especially for a kid's horror series. That being said, I think Dr. Vink is better in other episodes. Aaron Traeger, who plays Dr. Vink, is great in this, but I don't think he has a full grasp on the character just yet. In subsequent Dr. Vink episodes, he goes bigger and weirder and with a more menacing undertone. Vink is that kind of character that just can really be scenery chewing and big, but works all the more for it. As I watched this episode, I was reminded of Jack Nicholson's Joker performance from Batman '89. He was funny and wacky, but there was a real dark, ominous, grim undertone to him. That's the same ballpark as the Dr. Vink character, and Aaron Traeger absolutely nails that kind of acting in his performance throughout the show. One of the things I love about the series overall is their willingness to try and genuinely be scary and push the envelope for the intended age group. Obviously, I would argue that the intended age group for this show was probably around 11 or 12, and then starting at 11 or 12, and then into the later teen years. My favorite part of this episode is when Flynn turns his head around with his deathly pale skin and says, "I sort of died while laughing crazy." It's a creepy moment, really effective, kind of oddly funny too. It's a good example of the show's balance with its content. For example, when he holds up his arm to show he has no hand, it's just an empty jacket sleeve. We don't see a stump. I kind of wish we did, but for a kid's horror show, I understand why they didn't. It's also kind of a contrast to the head turning thing. The head turning was a little more gruesome and boundary pushing, but the hand gag is tame, but might be scary for younger viewers. The whole series is much like that. Unfortunately, a lot of children's horror either doesn't get made or avoids anything that quote-unquote might be too scary, and they hamstring themselves, and they end up with a dull show that ends up doing very little. This show, as we will see in coming episodes, featured a lot of relatable to kids elements. The idea of being lost in the woods or a strange and scary place is pretty universal, and it works well within the story. Of course, nowadays with technology, it's much harder to get good and truly lost. I'm willing to bet that Dr. Vink's yurt doesn't have much in the way of cell service. The kids' acting is a little stiff in this episode, and the parts where they have to scream in fear don't really work for me. They don't really sell it. I don't harbor any ill will towards anyone in this episode. They just don't quite pull off the scared bits. In general, I'm pretty easygoing on kid actors, especially back then. It was a hard job, it still is. The two actors do have a nice dynamic as brothers in this episode. That I really like, and they absolutely sold me on it. The older one getting annoyed and the younger one looking up to the older one, that's something that works. The ghostly noises outside of Dr. Vink's yurt also could have been better and more consistent. As they were getting closer to the yurt, it would have been nice to hear those noises in the woods, and then maybe Flynn says something like, "Oh, don't worry about those," etc. Then they die down, and as they approach the yurt, they fire up again, and the boys run to it. You get the idea. Did they have the time and the money to do this around child labor laws? Probably not. It was not uncommon for these episodes to have some morals or lessons to be learned in them. It was one of the ways to get around networks and censors who didn't like the idea of a kids' horror show in the first place. The stories would be inspired by classic literature and feature morality tales and such, as well as have happy endings. In this case, there aren't really any morals per se that I can parse from this episode. There are certainly some interesting facts about magnets being disruptive to a compass, which is an educational moment, but nothing in a be careful what you wish for or believe in yourself or honesty is the best policy type lesson. Nothing like that. We do, however, get a happy ending. The boys solve the riddle and get back home. I remember seeing this episode as a kid back in the 90s, but I don't remember being scared of it. I do, however, remember liking it overall. I also remember the riddle. I remembered the riddle, or at least the solving of the riddle, that it was, what do you put in a barrel to make it lighter? That I remembered. Some of the plot points, not so much. I didn't remember Flynn at all. Upon rewatch, it mostly holds up apart from the aforementioned sticking points. Overall, I'm going to say it's a strong 7 out of 10. It's a great start to a great series. I can't wait to go on from here. Act 2. Episode 1, The Tale of the Phantom Cab, introduces us to Frank Moore. This is the only episode where his last name is mentioned. Right off the bat, Frank is a bit of a tough guy, and Jason Alashran plays him really well. If I butchered that name, I apologize. A few minutes in, and I know who Frank is as a character and as a kid. Kind of defensive, punky, and sarcastic. However, as we will see in subsequent episodes, he usually lets his guard down a little and relaxes around the group, and you see more of his true character. He's kind of one of those get them before they get you type of people. My guess is that even though he fights with some of the other members in various episodes, he would consider them all pretty good friends in one way or another. You know, sort of bullyish, but not really a bully full-blown. If you remember fellow Nickelodeon show Doug, you know, the Roger Klotz character, sometimes he's like pretty much Doug's friend in the episodes. Other times he's, you know, convincing him to put underwear on a statue or something. But you get the idea. He's not a bully in the sense of like he beats me up every day and, you know, feeds me worms or something. Dr. Vink features in a lot of Frank's stories as an antagonist, as he created the character. Frank's stories feature hauntings and magic and menace. They lean on the dark side, but they are not quite the darkest on the show. Still, he has some really great episodes and tales to choose from. Frank's stories from the show are The Tale of the Phantom Cab, The Tale of the Midnight Madness, The Tale of the Full Moon, The Tale of the Dangerous Soup, The Tale of Cutter's Treasure, and The Tale of Train Magic. There are quite a few really great stories in here from Frank. All episodes we will get to in due time. I'm not sure I could pick a favorite, as I love Midnight Madness, Full Moon, and Dangerous Soup pretty equally. They are also kind of different animals and beasts. However, Feet to the Fire, I think I would have to give it to Midnight Madness as my favorite Frank story. It would also feature in a list of my favorite episodes in the entire show. Yet another thing that we will get to at some point in this podcast. Overall, as a storyteller, Frank is exceptionally strong in my opinion, especially when the show leans horror, which it didn't always do. However, I mainly view this as a kids' horror show, and everyone that I've ever talked to about it always mentions an episode that scared them or something that kind of freaked them out, as well as the fact that they always enjoyed watching it. So, that is the character of Frank Moore. Act 3. At the time the show was made, a general practice was creators would come up with an idea and pitch it to a studio. They would then get money to make what is called a pilot. They would cast it, and they would shoot it, and it would have all the things that the show was supposed to have. Basically, your standard episode. Once it was made, the show would be shown and then either passed on or picked up. We like the pilot. We are going to order an additional 18 episodes with an option to make an additional 6 or something like that. Generally, the pilot episode of a TV show ends up being the first episode of the first season. Not always, though. Sometimes it's the second. Occasionally, the pilot remains unaired. Before this, I assumed that Phantom Cab was the first episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Upon doing research, I found that it was in fact not. That honor sort of belongs to The Tale of the Twisted Claw. There is an asterisk to that fact that we will review once we get to that episode. The show was created with several influences and directions for the series to take. The creators wanted to incorporate folktales, urban legends, nod to classic horror creatures like vampires, ghosts, werewolves, and, of course, the Twilight Zone. The line submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society was cribbed from Rod Serling's original Twilight Zone intros. Despite the fact that at a young age I was, and remain, a massive fan of both those shows, I never noticed that connection. The show would also have relatable moments with the Midnight Society group that would also feature in the story. For example, if Gary and his little brother Tucker were fighting in an episode, one of their stories might revolve around two brothers who have to come together to battle an evil and cut each other some sort of slack. And then by the end of the episode, after the story had concluded, the fighting members of the Midnight Society would have made peace in one way or another, that kind of thing. It was a way to pitch the show that would make folks more comfortable with the idea of a kids' horror anthology show. You could say it's educational and teaches morals, it just happens to have vampires, etc. The show also did a real good job of having characters both within the inner stories and the Midnight Society feel like real people. They were relatable characters and not stereotypes that existed solely for the reason to beat viewers over the head with an obvious message. This lends the show a really nice quality that feels organic and not pushy. The characters exist to be who they are, not to represent something, not to push some kind of agenda. It can be moral and have messages and be scary and fun all at the same time. The show also featured strong female characters as well as males, featured all kinds of characters from different backgrounds and skill sets as well as spheres. Nerdy kids, sporty kids, kids with disabilities, like that episode with the space zoo where the deaf girl uses her deafness to her advantage and defeats all the alien zookeepers, that kind of thing. What the show doesn't do is make a big deal out of it and try to toot its own horn. It just naturally included a wide array of characters and events. So there you have it, The Tale of the Phantom Cab, Season 1, Episode 1. What did you think of this episode? Have you seen it? Do you remember seeing it when it first aired, or at least in rerun form back in the 90s? Did it scare you? This is your host, Professor Terror, declaring this episode of the Midnight Dust Podcast Society officially closed. And as always, I am not a nutbag. See you next time.